Well, hello and welcome back. We are here once again going through another little discussion here between myself and Michael. We are talking about RB Consulting. We talk about Envision QA. We talk about Developreneur and the Building Better Developers site, and all things that are sort of bugging us a little bit and lessons learned along the way as we are launching, advancing, and rebooting some companies. So, figure if nothing else, you can hopefully learn from some of our mistakes and not suffer the same pain points we are. And welcome in, Michael. How's your day going?
Pretty good. It's been a pretty good week so far. How about you?
It's been a fun one. This is one of those. Had a great interview today or meeting today with a customer, and these are the fun ones that you occasionally get because he sends me an email and he's like, "Hey, we want to talk about A and B and C." I was like, "Okay, great. We'll talk about these things." And we get into the call, and the one had been done like months ago, and he'd forgotten about it. The other one, he suddenly realized he wasn't sure he had the budget for it right now. And the other one, he was like, "Well, I think we're going to do this, but I'm not really sure about the value." And that was sort of the same thing as he ended up sort of backing out and saying, "Oh, well, maybe it was one of those that was it only worked on the new data. They didn't want to go back and fix old data." And it turned out that it works fine with the new data. He was dealing with legacy data. So one of the things that he had explicitly chosen to do, he got bit by. So I think this is one that'll lead us into, I think, our podcast this time. I want to do a little, I guess we'll talk about like CYA kind of stuff, because this is something I don't think we've talked about recently as much. We have touched on in the past, but it's the idea of like status reporting and communicating and making sure that you're clear on what's being done, and also that you have essentially a paper trail of some sort so you can look back and say, what did I get done and when did I get it done? Sound good? Does that sound like a fun topic for this time around?
Oh, yes, definitely. In fact, we've had similar conversations at work, and I've had similar conversations with customers along those same lines. So I love this. So why don't you kick it off then with kind of the use case or where this came into play this week with these customers?
Will do. So, well, you guys get to see us kick this off on the audio side again. Hello and welcome back. Thank you for tuning in. We are here just coming right through your ear holes, Building Better Developers, Developreneur Podcast. Once again, this episode, we're going to get into a little CYA, essentially. It's, yes, you could talk about documentation or communication, but at the end of the day, it is a little bit of a CYA kind of a topic. And the reason this came up this time is I had a customer call today that was it's one of these where like, "Hey, here's the agenda. This is what we want to talk about." Great. And so we get into the call and everything kicks off. And right away, the first item we start talking about, it's like, "I think that's already there." And sure enough, it's there. It's a non-issue. It's already been taken care of months ago. It's just, this is one of those where you have somebody that is not the frontline user, and they don't realize necessarily exactly everything that's going on, which is also an interesting thing we're going to talk about, because this is somebody that gets regular status, just doesn't probably read the statuses very closely. And so, sometimes you have to look at how you communicate such statuses. But then he had another item. This one, we got into the call and he realized, "I'm not sure I got the budget for that. So let's like hold off on that." So he like throws out that carrot, and then it's like, "Oh, wait, maybe we're not going to do that right now." And then he got to another one and it was, "Well, we need to look at it." And it turned out it's one of these things that the data they were looking at was wrong. It only worked for new data, not old data. He ran into it with the old data. It was something he had explicitly said, "We don't want to deal with the old data. We're only going to do this for the new data." And so suddenly the entire agenda, it was basically, the call ended up, he's like, "Well, it was really good talking to you guys again, at least." It was one of those where it's just, nothing really useful came out of it other than just, a little bit of FaceTime with the customer. So I guess, well, you said that you've had some stuff this week or recently that is in that same line. So what has been your experience along those lines lately?
So recently, especially, so with a lot of us, we have side hustles. I also still work for full-time job for a software company. And one of the complaints we've run into recently is we started rewriting 3 pipelines of our application. We had some legacy software. We decided to just start writing it. The problem we ran into is we started this project 6 months ago, and we really didn't have a clear roadmap as to what was going to happen in Q1. Well, here we are in Q1, and we have deadlines that are in 30 days. Well, we have code that is where the business thinks we're at one place, but we're really at another place. And if we actually had understood that, oh, this deadline's coming, we would have put more hands on something sooner instead of this kind of little short mad dash to the end in this last sprint or two. The other thing I've run into is even within the rewrite, some of the code we're putting out there is very cumbersome, very large, and very hard to follow. So one of the things, as we talk about this, the CYA, is what do you think about coding standards with CYA, where we actually write clean code that documents itself, so when we come back, we don't have to struggle and try to figure out what was done.
I think that is one of the CYA aspect of well-documented code is actually a very interesting tack that I don't think we've talked about. I don't think about it as much, but it's a really good point, because it is something where you will run into situations, and this is something we ran into recently as well. We've talked about this. We had a client that they had a very old version of software. There's a bunch of upgrades, and so we ended up going through and doing some upgrades, and then it's ended up being moved on to somebody else. And it is something that, one, we want to have that roadmap of what did we do, so we can figure out what we need to do if we're going to, particularly if you're going to do it to a staging server, but now you got to do updates to your production server, so they've got to be in sync. You want to make sure that you have that basically that roadmap of how did I get from point A to point B. But also from a CYA point of view, if somebody comes in and takes over your code and they say, hey, this was a mess. This was worthless code. Or, they wrote all of these bugs into this stuff. And sometimes you will have a situation where, okay, yeah, you wrote bad code. Occasionally we do that. But there's also times where somebody comes in and they end up not understanding what was built. They don't read the documentation. They don't look at stuff. Well, shame on you if you don't have documentation, because if you didn't give them documentation, then it's not their fault they didn't read it. But if you did, it's nice having that paper trail, essentially, which is why I don't know why anybody in the modern age would not use version control while they're developing. I think the best thing you can do for yourself is get in a habit. And I've had projects where they don't officially have version control. I have my own Git repository. You can throw it out. You can do it GitHub for free, save it off, like do labels, do everything, at least commit. I would say at least commit and push daily at the absolute minimum. I very often will do it based on big chunks of code. And then don't be afraid to put some tags in there or branches or everything else, particularly if it's a team. Go ahead and branch off of it, work on your branch, and then merge that thing back. Then you know exactly what you've done. You have something well documented, and you have that CYA. You can point to, this is what I did. This is how we got from point A to point B. And this is where I made mistakes, and this is where other people made mistakes and pointed their finger at me.
Exactly, which is kind of funny, which is why I kind of started this conversation at the code level, kind of talking about clean code, for a couple of reasons. One, essentially, your code is a source of truth, right? No matter what documentation you have, what wikis you have, what may be written on, Jira tickets, or as far as what's been done, at the end of the day, what's in the code is really what's there, what the application does. So if you document your code and you write it cleanly, you essentially have your blueprint as to what the application does right there. If you're doing Java, include some simple Java docs. And if you're not really good at using Java docs or some type of, code documentation, write better code, write descriptive code so that as you're reading the code, you can almost read it as a use case. That's one approach. The other thing, I want to kind of now take this from the code level to a tier up. So as developers, and even project managers, engineers, we've been through the process of projects where, like you said, you talk to a customer and he's like, oh, we did this 6 months ago. We forgot. We didn't get it done. That kind of gets you to project management tools like Atlassian, Bitbucket, like you said, Git repository and code reviews. So where do you see those kind of working for CYA to an extent? Because at the end of the day, as developers, we're not necessarily the ones putting those in, but we have to use those to kind of record our work.
Oh, I think that is, those are great tools to use. I think we overlook them way too often. They're way too often. I've been on a development team and they have coding standards that include code reviews and regular commits and branches and pull requests and all of these things. And you'll see that people will commit code and their comment will be, wrote some code, fixed a bug. It's like that, uselessly in specific. Now, sometimes it's nice and you'll have but it's sort of a crutch as people refer back to, like, for example, a Jira ticket number. So I worked on some code, I solved ticket, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so you can at least go to the ticket and see what it applies to. But I think you're still not using it as well as you could because you're not really saying anything about what you did. Unless you're going back to that ticket and you're fully commenting that out, you're better off in your code commits to be able to use the space that you have there to talk about what were the changes, what are the key pieces you did. And if you have to write a book when you do a commit, you're not committing off enough. You should be doing stuff in, a little bit more bite-sized chunks so that you could look at your history of commits and sort of see what you did, because that gives you that source of truth. And then with a code review, even better, because now I had this commit, and that actually is going to sort of help confirm it because they're going to do a code review. They're going to look at your comments. They're going to say, what did you say you did? Does the code do that? They're going to help you out. And so it's a really good, that's like a rock solid CYA kind of thing, because now you have not only your system of truth of your source code, but you have the history, the audit trail of how you got there. And if you're in a public company, if somebody's coming in and your company is going to go public, then that's one of the things they're going to look at is, do you have those processes and procedures in place so that you can rebuild where you were 6 months ago, and definitely so that you can rebuild whatever your current version of the software is.
All right. So for the third point with this, if you were to actually put in good QA practices in place where you actually have unit tests that test the white box testing of the code, you have your regression test that tests the black box testing, or you have the integration test that tests all the integrated pieces together, then your tests actually become your documentation. Your tests become the use cases as to how the application is going to work. And it is, as you work the code and the code breaks something, you have to go fix the test, which changes the use case, and you know what has changed. So your stories kind of migrate with the application. If you forgo the testing and go the documentation route, your documentation can become stale. You could make 6 months worth of changes to the code and your documentation may be 6 months old, or your APIs might not be right. And you send that out to a customer, they're like, it doesn't work. What's going on? So that's where I think if we kind of flip the model on its head, where as we write these business cases or we write these use cases from the project management side to the developer, if we write them with testing in mind and you kind of put that test-driven approach in place, then there really is no excuse for you not to have CYA from the beginning. From the moment you get the requirements, you can say, okay, here's how you test this. Here's how this is supposed to work. You write that test first, and then you write the code. So then at the end of the day, you have, clear as day that your test works as expected, that your code works.
That's true. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Is your documentation can go stale easier than your tests can. But your tests can also. I think it's a very good point. But I also think that you have to make sure that you are keeping your tests up to date as you go. I've seen a lot of situations where a company has got just awesome bed of unit tests and maybe even some good regression tests, but they were sort of like version 1 and now we're version 2.0 of the application, and all that stuff still works because that core stuff isn't being touched, but they didn't maintain it along the way. So you do have to, you have to have that discipline to continue to do that and not just do it initially. And we do this so often with documentation and everything else is we build everything out, we do it all right. And then we start writing, we get into the implementation point and stuff starts going out the window because like, well, we don't have time to do that. So we're going to write the code. We're not going to write the test. So you do want to make sure that and this is where the CI/CD stuff comes in, that continuous integration and deployment and having your tests built in and making sure that it's with code reviews to make sure that when there's code written, there are tests that go with that code that are also being committed so that your whole system, your whole process is being updated as you go. Now that does dovetail into another point I wanted to talk about a little bit is, we'll talk like saying something and nobody's listening, which is the CYA part of doing like status and documentation and tests, even if nobody cares. So even though your tests are there and you're seeing, you've got the test results that you can always point back to, it becomes difficult to say the least. It's sort of depressing to be doing all that work and doing the right thing and nobody cares. You're not seeing, your manager's not seeing it, or just is like, okay, great, you did your test. Or they, that they never, you write a status every day and they never read it. Those kinds of things. I do want to talk about, get your thoughts on that, is like from your point of view, is like when you're sitting there and you're doing the right thing, but nobody cares, how do you motivate yourself to keep doing it anyways?
Well, one of the biggest motivators for me that makes me always try to follow the best practices, the test-driven development approach, is simply, I don't want to be the one that puts a piece of code in there that takes the system down that costs my company $1 million an hour. I've been in a couple situations in my career where code has gone live and we've actually started costing customers money the moment it gets turned on. You don't want that. Not only are you potentially on the hook financially, you could legally be on the hook, especially if it's like patient information. You don't want to expose that stuff. You don't want to be a part of a HIPAA violation. And so to me, I stay motivated because of that. It's not so much that my manager wants this or, to me, at the end of the day, I want to put out the best code that I can and make sure that the software I write is the cleanest and that basically, if I touch code, I leave it in a better place than when I came in. I want to make sure that the person that comes behind me can easily read my code, follow along, and know what happened and be able to work it if there's a problem or if they're making change. That is one of the biggest, not caveats, but one of the biggest things I've seen with a lot of junior developers. They don't do that at all. They just quickly let me hack it out. Okay, done, move on. Mid-level developers, they're a little more methodical. They're a little more documentation. They spend the time to try to make sure that they do it right. But again, they're under deadlines, so they kind of still rush through to get things out. And then you have the more senior engineers where, we could be under time or high pressure. We could be on a project that's understaffed. And now what are we going to do? We have to make shortcuts. But you try to make the shortcuts not so much on processes or quality, but just try to make sure that you keep what you're doing as simple as possible and not bloat your code. So you stay like hyper-focused. You have to make one change, make that one change, but make it the best way you can.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's that's the key to all of this, is that the reason we should be doing this, while we talked about the CYA as our topic for this one, and that is a huge side effect benefit of doing things the right way. But these are also things that will help us build better code. This helps us. It's going to be easier to maintain. It's going to be easier for us to go back, even if we're the maintainer, and figure out what did we do. If something breaks, we can figure out what code changed so we can get to that break faster. If we have to look at our entire code base every time we've got a bug, we're in trouble. If we can look back and say, well, we only changed these 5 lines of code, then most likely those 5 lines of code are where the break occurred or somehow are related to it. So that at least gives us a starting point. And that is where we become more efficient, and we're going to be better as developers. And I think that's why more senior developers, when you start as a junior, you just do what you're told. Usually that's just, most of us are that way. But then as you get further along, you get a little more confident and realize that the processes and procedures are there for a reason, that they protect the customer as well as us, as well as the software stability itself. And so there's a reason that these practices are in place. And it's not these aren't things that we can just, take a shortcut and say, oh, this takes time, we're going to throw it out. Instead, we need to be more specific about it and maybe change the scope, or as you said, sort of focus. Maybe you don't architect the most incredibly perfect solution to it, but instead you simplify that down, but then make sure that simple solution is so much better. It's like a car. If you want to go build a Porsche from scratch, then you get halfway into it and you run out of money, then you're not able to do anything. But if instead you said, hey, I'm just going to build myself a bike so I can get from point A to point B, then you're going to get there faster. It's still going to work. It's going to be solid. You don't have to have a bike that's going to fall apart versus, the Porsche that falls apart. I know it's a crappy analogy, but it is one of those things that that you run into. It's better to have something lesser and solid, that's rock solid, than it is to have a whole bunch of features that half of them don't work. And there's so many products that are on that are strewn over the internet highway or whatever it is, that failed because that's exactly what they did. They tried to throw too much stuff at it, and it ended up falling under its own weight.
Can I add one thing to that? In terms for developers, regardless of what level you're at, one of the biggest mistakes we can make when we go to write code, when we go to take an assignment and go do something, we don't take enough time to review the ticket. We don't take enough time to make sure that all the requirements are there, or potentially some of the unforeseen edge cases that might be very edge, but may not be. For like a simple date picker, if you were to have a start date, end date for a search of data, you would have an edge case. Well, what happens if they put in a date that is outside of the range, or put an end date before a start date? Yes, that's an edge case. And a lot of people would test that, but some companies won't test that because it's like, well, that's not what the users are going to put in. And typically that could cause some weirdness with the system or break the system. So essentially, as an additional point to cover your ass, or as a CYA, is make sure that before you even do anything, make sure you understand the tickets, make sure you have all the requirements, and make sure that you understand the edge cases. So when you do write your code, again, this kind of gets back to testing. You know how to test it. You know what it's supposed to do. And therefore, you're writing what should work. And if it's all agreed to in the ticket, all that's defined. If something breaks, you can refer back to the ticket and say, okay, that's an edge case that was not considered. We need a new ticket.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things, like your mom used to always say, eat your vegetables, brush your teeth, and read your requirements thoroughly. I think those are the kinds of things that we need to think about, because some people see it, and whether it's communicating or receiving it, is the developer being sort of, obnoxious or rude or something, because they're like, well, wait a minute, I've got more questions about this. But it's not. It's about getting those details out and being able to discuss those, so that when we build it, we know what we're building, and we don't go halfway into it and then have to change stuff, rewrite all the other things that could come out of. There's a lot of bad stuff that can come out of surprise requirements that pop up, or edge cases that suddenly are, a lot of times like, well, nobody's ever going to do that. And then you find out that half of your population does. Yeah, those are the kinds of things that you have to watch out for, and they're what cause delays in software. They cause, the overruns in budgets and all that kind of stuff, is because the requirements piece is shortcut way too often. And we do it as developers too. We just read through it like, oh yeah, I got it. No problem. I get it. I understand it. And then you realize that no, you didn't, because you didn't think about these half dozen different cases that are maybe very critical. They may not be edge. They may be things that like, oh, this probably happens fairly often. And you find out way too often that it does. So I'll give you your last thought on this one.
I was just going to add one additional piece to that. So along with that, the other thing to kind of keep in mind is when you're dealing with trying to do things right, you're dealing with requirements. And those weird edge cases. If you, again, think things through, you'll be in a better place. The other thing you might also consider is, as we continue this weird shift in the economy, shift in our business practices, and shifting in the software model, We've seen a lot of big corporations do the shift left, where they're moving testing to the developers. We have fast to fail, where we have to let's get something out there and see what the customer will do with it. Well, those approaches are well and meaningful. They actually bring up more pitfalls that you really need to make sure you understand how to CYA. Otherwise, you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Is that sometimes you don't want to get the ugly thing out there, because then it's like, yeah, they'll tell you right away that it's failed, but then they may decide that it's failed so much they don't want to talk to you again. So you have to watch out for that. And that's what we have to watch out for, is failing by going way too long on an episode. So we're going to wrap this one up. Just in case that you've got some limit to your podcast listening time frame today. As always, shoot us an email at info@developandoor.com. If you've got any questions, topics, anything like that you want to reach out, you can check us out at developandoor.com. There's blog articles. There are links to the podcast, to the YouTube channel, to all kinds of other fun stuff that's out there. Fun for everyone. Well, maybe not everyone, but for enough people, go ahead and check out the site. And we're just going to continue with this season. We're going to continue to work on our way through some of these common business problems that we're hitting, and share those with you. So go out there and have yourself a great day, a great week, and we will talk to you next time. It's really important on an audio version is to make sure that you have like a little finger thing, like next time, because that's so important. These are the things that you get from a video that you don't get from the audio, is all of the like extra gesturing that goes on. Then you realize people that are talking with their hands does no good on a podcast. So I think that about wraps it up for us this time on the video side as well. So I can like, this wraps us up or something. I'll give a little hand motion there. And we'll just continue on. We've got like, we have these conversations all the time. And this one has been another where we just sort of like jumped in and it's like, hey, what are we running into? Because like you guys, we are here all the time running into every day. It feels like we've got a new problem to solve, and 6 different ways that we need to solve it. So it's however we can help each other out, we're more than happy to do so. You can go ahead and subscribe to the channel, and you'll see whatever our latest stuff is. You get it when it drops. We're doing this twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays. Podcast drops. The latest video is going to drop. Basically, the video version drops at the same time. So you're really not losing anything. If you want to listen to the podcast, you get it at basically the same time that you could get the video. It's just whatever, whether you want to watch us or whether you want to hear us, listen to us while you're going around in your drive time and, doing your Uber Eats or whatever it is you happen to do. So we want to thank you for your time. As always, leave some comments out there. Let us know what you think. Subscribe and let us know what are some things you'd like to see us to talk about in the future. If you've got anything in particular that has been bugging you, we'll be more than happy to either cover it maybe here, or you can shoot us that email and we can take that offline and talk to you that way as well. We're always looking for ways to solve problems, and yeah, we have a bunch, but we're always looking for more. So, any parting thoughts from you, Mike?
Yeah, the only thing I would like to add, in addition, if you are watching the video, just make sure to check out the notes section in YouTube, or go out to developandoor.com and check out the blog for the podcast. We do put additional links in there to other material, and also to some of the software that we talked about within the conversations that we have.
Good point. Yeah, I forgot to say, and links in the show notes, because that's almost always going to be there. There's going to be links to us and where we can, other places that we reference. So I think that'll wrap this one up. We're going to go get back to our normal non-developer lives, and you guys have a great one, and we will talk to you next time.